This is Theology, where we talk to Christian academics and authors about their work in a way that anyone can understand. Today's guest is Dr. Carey, professor of New Testament at Lancaster Theological Seminary. He has an MDiv from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and a PhD from Vanderbilt. He's written or co-edited 12 books, including the recently published Rereading Revelation, Theology, Ethics, and Resistance. He's also a pastor at Life Church in Lancaster. I've been hoping to talk about Revelation on the show for a while, basically since I started the show last year, and today's finally the day. I asked Dr. Carey about the rapture, about what Revelation is really trying to communicate, both in its own day and with us today, and what it even means to call Revelation an apocalypse, or to group it with books like Daniel or otherwise. If you're new to the show, please leave a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and find us on social media. This is Theology U, episode 33. Dr. Carey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, of course. I was just telling you before we get going, it's an exciting episode for me. I've been trying to do a Revelation episode for a long time, and I have a copy of your book here, which we're going to talk about loosely. I think we'll get into maybe more detail about the book in particular towards the end. But I'm excited to just talk about Revelation in general. I want to start with a couple episodes we talked to Dr. Aubrey Buster from Wheaton about the book of Daniel, which the second half of course, has kind of our first apocalypse, what scholars will call apocalyptic literature in the Bible. And Revelation, of course, is the last one, it's the last book. How would you our first framing question, when we think about what is an apocalypse, what's going on, how would you kind of sum up what that is? And then we'll get more specifically into the book itself.
Sure. One way in is that the first word in Greek in the book of Revelation is apocalypsis, which means sort of an uncovering or a revealing, an unveiling of something. So within the Bible, but also beyond the Bible, because ancient Jews and Christians wrote quite a few of these literary apocalypses, what happens in the text is a visionary has an experience that reveals something other than the world that we think we're looking at, the ordinary, phenomenal world. It might be what's going on in heaven or hell. It might be what God will do in the future. And it's an interactive vision. They often an angel or some other heavenly being will guide them through the experience. You get some reflection on moments when they're afraid, scared, confused. That's really one of the distinctive things about the apocalypses. But what they claim to do is reveal the true ultimate nature of things. The one thing I would add is that the word apocalypse, while it is the first word in Revelation, is really a category modern scholars use to cluster these books together. They could be clustered with other books, or we could notice some of the ways that Revelation and Daniel are like Zechariah or parts of Joel, and you could go on and on. So it really is an analytical category. But what I will say is, if you read several of the apocalypses, you begin to understand how they work because they use a lot of the same literary conventions.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's helpful. To kind of jump into some of the hot topics that, at least questions I've got, I told people we were doing a Revelation episode, and you immediately get flooded with, ask them about this. But one of the things revealed, you used the word, the apocalypse is to reveal, is the mark of the beast. I know that's a popular question. Yeah. And I'm going to read here from Revelation 13. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had two horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs, it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, deceive the inhabitants of the earth, order them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. So, Dr. Carey, what is going on? What is this mark of the beast? What are we talking about? Could you help us maybe understand it a little bit?
I can try. This really isn't a short answer question, Will, because the passage you just read has a lot going on.
Yeah, that's for
So,
sure. That is for
right.
sure.
The beast is the primary antagonist of the lamb in Revelation. That the lamb is the primary symbol for Jesus. And the beast is arrogant, idolatrous, violent, and it exercises economic exploitation. The passage talks about no one can buy or sell. Revelation deals in symbols and the relationships among symbols, like the lamb and the beast have a lot in common, but different. They're not opposites, but they are opposed, right, in the way that Revelation sets it up. So in the passage you read, there's a second beast, right? You meet the first beast at the beginning of chapter 13, but then the second beast who is promoting worship and conformity to the ways of the beast. And no one can buy or sell unless they have the mark. Well, the Lamb's followers have marks too, right? So this is a way of designating loyalty or at least adherence to a certain way. You're either a follower of the Lamb or you're in the world of the beast. We haven't even gotten to the last verse of the chapter that I thought you were about to read. This calls for wisdom, right? To understand or calculate the number of the beast.
Yeah. Yeah, we can put on the screen. It's 13:18. We get this
Yeah.
calls for wisdom, like you said. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is written, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666.
And that line, it's the number of a man, has driven interpreters nuts through the centuries, right? How do you pin this number on a human being who does all the things the beast does? And everything's been tried. The number is 666. And there are two primary schools of interpreting that number. One is that Revelation is big on the number 7 as signifying holy things and things that are complete. So the number 6 could be just not 7, right? Something inferior, partial, distorted. But the passage says, but it's the number of a person, right? That's verse 18. And so among scholars, the most popular interpretation is the number is being assigned to the Roman Emperor Nero. If this requires some numerology, calculating in Greek and Hebrew letters, Neron Caesar or Nero Caesar would add up to 666. But in Hebrew, Revelation's written in Greek. You'll notice in a modern translation, there's a footnote that says some manuscripts say 616. And, I didn't say Nero, I said Neron with an N. That N happens to count for 50 and in Hebrew can be dropped. And so that name would explain why we have these two traditions of people copying Revelation. But it could very well be that what Revelation is saying, almost surely it's written after the time of Nero. We don't know that for a fact, but we have reasons for thinking it. But Nero is the first of the Roman emperors, as understood, to have persecuted the followers of Jesus in the wake of the Great Fire in Rome. And it was local, but at least our historical traditions say that. There seems to be a tradition of reflecting upon Nero among early Christians as being particularly wicked. And so it's not that Revelation is saying the beast is the Emperor Nero, but Nero represents all of these things, the potential for violence, persecution, corruption, big with Nero, or at least as he's remembered. That would be my guess, but I wouldn't claim to be sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And that brings up the question then is, are we talking about the future or are we reflecting on what's currently happening? Or, is it somehow both? Like you said, Nero, of course, I would say, relatively famous for persecuting Christians. I think he blames Christians for starting the big
Mhm.
fire. Um, and we have extra biblical, obviously, reasons to think Nero was a relatively, morally inept person. I don't think anyone is historically praising Nero as a holy person. So do you read it more as presumably John writing Revelation, kind of observing what's happening and reflecting on, look at this evil in the world, more so than he's like projecting the future, or do you think he's doing both of those things at the same time?
I think both in a certain way. So at the beginning and end of Revelation, and multiple times, John tells his readers he's addressing things that are about to happen soon.
Hmm.
So, in that way, he signals that he's writing about events in his own era. He also addresses Revelation to 7 assemblies or churches in the Roman province of Asia, which would be like western, southwestern Turkey today. So presumably the message is relevant to them and whatever they're experiencing at that moment. So in that sense, Revelation is written about its own time and place and the empire that dominates that time and place. But Revelation also has a future outlook because it's saying, and God is going to overcome not just the beast, but also the devil, right? And all forms of wickedness are going to be purged from the world. A new Jerusalem's coming down from heaven. All of that is future oriented. What it's not is predictive in the sense of a timeline. Revelation doesn't do that. But, those Christians who deny that there's a future dimension of Revelation are leaving a chunk of the book out. Those who think it's predicting future headlines are completely ignoring what most of the book is doing.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think future headlines is a good way to put it. I know we're recording this on September 25th, a couple days after I saw all over social media and the internet Christians pretty sure the rapture was happening, for about the 500th time. I saw some people very sure it was happening on Tuesday. Um, could you talk about that? Talk about where some of these ideas, what is the rapture is the term constantly, used for it. And I want to get to what you think Revelation is actually saying about the end times, with a little more certainty. But let's start with, what is the rapture? What are people even talking about?
Yeah, the idea of the rapture is that Jesus is going to return toward the end of history and take his followers who are alive off the earth to join him in the sky.
Hmm.
And then history will come to its end, which is, in most rapture believers' imaginations, very violent.
Hmm.
And so believers will be rescued from that. That idea doesn't come from nowhere. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul talks about Jesus riding the clouds, a trumpet sounding, and Paul says, those who are asleep, those who are dead, will rise, but we will be caught up in the air to join Jesus.
Hmm.
That's the primary place that idea comes from. It's not mentioned in Revelation. And so in the 19th century, I'm not saying the ideas were all new, but the way of formulating it, creating a whole system with charts and graphs and sequences, comes into being through Irish, English, and North American interpreters in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and spreads rapidly, so that it's really a defining characteristic for some historians of American
Hmm.
evangelicalism, right? It became that. You'd go into a Christian bookstore when they used to exist,
Hmm.
and they would just have shelves of books about the rapture or about rapture theology. So it can be dated. I mean, most Christians didn't read Revelation that way for a long time. But I think the rise of sort of an industrial scientific mindset led some people to think, oh, the Bible must be speaking in some kind of system.
Hmm.
And if we can collect verses from Zechariah and Matthew and First Thessalonians and Revelation and Daniel, we can systematize it and lay out a chart or something.
Yeah, and I assume by the way you're talking about it, you don't find these models very convincing.
I don't. I think they depend on, and I'm a classroom teacher, so I come up with gimmicks. One is I call it a Dick Tracy apocalyptic decoder ring way of reading, right? That what's in the text has to be, if you could just spin the ring the right way, you could figure out what it means. And so, the best selling form of rapture theology was Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet Earth. And then he has other books where he, reads these flying beasts that sting with their tails in Revelation as Cobra attack helicopters,
Hmm.
right? Everything has to correspond to something else in our current world, and you have to decode everything that way. But the other thing they do is sort of treat the Bible, or at least eschatology, these last things parts, aspects of interpreting the Bible, like a jigsaw puzzle.
Hmm.
So then you're fitting a passage from one biblical book into another biblical book, into another biblical book to make this one picture, this one system. Whereas those books may be doing and imagining very different things in very different contexts. And I think those two moves are what create a rapture theology way of reading Revelation and the whole Bible, really.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's helpful. And I think if anything, history kind of disproves or at least makes me, extremely doubtful of anyone who claims the rapture is coming, as well as passages where, we get very explicitly, no one knows, no one knows the day.
Right, right.
So anytime someone claims that, it's hard not to go, how are you the one who found out when no one else could? Certainly, I think it is a fair question. But then talk a little bit about what do you think the end times will look like? I mean, the Bible doesn't tell us nothing. Like you said, we have kind of these hints, kind of these cryptic passages. If you had to guess, with all your research, obviously critical thinking about this, what's kind of a more accurate picture for someone who's thinking, okay, if I'm not, if this rapture thing that I've heard is kind of not helpful, what's a more kind of accurate or at least responsible way to think about the end times in your view?
I'm going to have to take a little bit of an in run to your question, Will, to set up what I want to say.
Okay, great.
I think books like Revelation and Daniel, a lot of the biblical prophets, even some of the language Paul uses and we have in the Gospels, when biblical authors are speaking about the resolution of all these things, they tend to go to symbols.
Hmm.
And I describe it as a kind of poetry. So the symbols that they're using largely come from the ancient Mediterranean, Near Eastern world, where deities ride on clouds. I mean, that's widely known kind of phenomenon of ancient religious world and imagination. Statues, images, monsters, all of that. That's not to say we don't take it seriously, but it is to say that that seems to be the language. And so I think the heart of biblical hope is, if you're Jewish, God called Abraham and Sarah and their descendants and has been faithful to them and will be faithful. So you get the Hebrew prophets saying, there's going to be an age. The lion and lamb can lie down together.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're thinking like a Christian, you're thinking, Jesus has arrived and God has raised him from the dead. This means God is going to overcome evil. And in a way, that really is an expression of Jewish hope. God is going to bring an age of peace and righteousness and, deliverance from suffering.
Yeah.
when I'm asked, what do I really believe about these things? The bottom line answer is, I trust God.
Hmm.
I do have hope. I do have eschatological hope. But, and I've written a book about eschatological hope. I think that the whole point of Jewish Christian revelation is that this is who God is, this is what God is about in the world, this is where God is headed. And at the same time, that whatever God has for the world and for us is going to be far more wonderful than I'm going to imagine.
Hmm.
And I can live with I trust God.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really helpful way to explain kind of the world of mystery that we're presented with. I have, usually on the show, I'm asking other people for their opinion. This actually happens to be something that I have a bit of an opinion on, primarily because when I think of new heavens and new earth, that's an image of hope for me in our current world, and thinking, the alternative, to think of a world where we're snatched up to some other reality and we leave earth behind, is essentially hopeless. I'm not really interested in a world that's going to crap and that I'm going to be rescued from. To me, the biblical ethic in general, that's where we're going. I think that's what, to me, the crux of your book is about the ethics. What does Revelation actually tell us about how to live now? Because, to be honest, for my Christian faith, I need help about how to live now, in the world we're in. And I'm much more interested in trying to make the world better and redeem it and be an agent of positive change, bringing God's kingdom now. Like when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is here, I like to explain it as my eternal life as a Christian has already started.
Right.
I'm in it. It doesn't start when I die and I go somewhere else. And I just have real concerns about people who want to focus on Revelation and the end times being rescued somewhere else, when we have like an earth and many people for which Christians ought to be caring for as best we can now. And so that's kind of where, I'm curious if you have thoughts on kind of, and maybe that'll transition us into your book, like the ethics and the politics that are wrapped up in how you think about what comes after this life on earth.
I think I can sort of do a segue.
Yeah, great.
When you think about the primary images we get in the New Testament for what this new world would look like, it is not going off into heaven and being in the sky. There is that imagery. But the primary symbols are the kingdom or reign of God, a banquet, the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven to earth, right? Revelation doesn't end with people going to heaven.
Right.
It is a renewal of the created order with fresh fruit and clear water. And
right.
All of that imagery is social and material. It's this world, but it's different. And so when I think about the kinds of symbols the Bible uses, I think like you do, you talked about living in the kingdom or reign of God now. That's eschatological. This is what I think God does, and I'm going to live into that. I want to live in a world where people get along, enjoy each other, enjoy pleasure, experience worship. Yeah. Now, that's not the specific question of what Revelation's asking people to do.
Sure.
Which is a little different. And if you'd like, I can steer in that direction. But just for now, that big eschatological question is, I think the Bible has lots of resources for the way you're thinking it through.
Yeah, I think that this is a great spot to kind of transition. I mean, your subtitle is Theology, Ethics, and Resistance.
Yeah.
Let's go into that. Maybe we can take them, one at a time. We've kind of started with theology already in a sense, and ethics, and then we'll get to resistance in a little bit. Talk about the theology and ethics of Revelation, kind of more in particular.
Sure. Revelation, I think, is at once a Christian book in the sense that it's about Jesus, and a very Jewish book. I think the author of Revelation calls himself John, didn't understand being a follower of Jesus as being anything other than an expression of Jewish faith. And so one way we could talk about how Revelation does theology, just an example, is in chapter 4, John enters this heavenly throne room. It's like in the Psalms. There's someone, God, sitting on the throne surrounded with heavenly beings, and there are mortals there too who are martyrs, and there's God. And as he moves into chapter 5, the one seated on the throne's holding a scroll that's sealed, 7 seals, and no one can open it. And so this is a crisis. John cries big tears, and he hears a voice in heaven saying, "Look, the Lion of the tribe of Judah is worthy. He can open the scroll and its seals." Okay. Lion is an image, right? It's drawn from the book of Isaiah. It also shows up, I think it is Judah who is a lion among the descendants of Abraham. So we're going to have this fierce victory, snarling teeth, claws, killer predator. That's what we need because we're in really bad shape. If you can't hear the overtones of 2025 in that, I don't know what to say. How many Christians want, some sort of ferocious advocate?
Yeah.
And then John looks, and the lion never shows up. He gets a lamb, and the lamb is standing. It's bloody. It's been slaughtered, but somehow it's alive. And from now on, Revelation is going to be talking about the lamb. All lamb all the time, no lion. And the lamb has a weapon, a sword that comes out of its mouth. The lamb's weapon is the truth. So this is theology, but it's not a theological essay like you'd write in school. It's theology and poetry. Oh, maybe lion theology isn't what we need for Revelation. And then Revelation goes on to demonstrate how the lamb and the lion, the lamb and the one seated on the throne, sometimes they sit on the throne together. Sometimes just the lamb is there. So we're starting to see a kind of reflection on the divinity of Jesus. It's not systematized, it's not creedal, but it's clear that the lamb can receive worship just like the one on the throne does. Those are aspects of theology. God is the one who rules, but the lamb does too, and this is how the lamb rules, with faithfulness and truth. That would be theology.
Yeah, and just to kind of make more explicit some of those images, obviously the lamb is a symbol for Jesus, and I would go back to the Passover. Are both those correct?
That's the link that's being made. I will say there's a little slide there in that the Passover lamb is not about, as many imagine, it's not a forgiveness lamb. It's a liberation lamb.
Yeah, before this episode goes up, I just talked to Andrew Rillera in his book Lamb of the Free, which is about this exact point, that the Passover lamb, it's not the first one. It's not even a sacrifice. There's no priests. There's no altar, and that it's a feast, and it's the inauguration of a new covenant. And I think a much more helpful image is it's celebrating God's deliverance.
Yeah.
Right. In the same way, it's marking God delivering them. It's a celebration, and like you said earlier, it's in community. It's with people. That's what it's all about. It's about Jesus. Obviously, the Passover, which comes to represent Jesus in the end. Jesus kind of makes that explicit about himself. But like you said, it's not necessarily a mighty warrior who's dominating and violently, attacking people. It's a life surrendered, right? It's a life given up, and a celebration of God's deliverance for us.
And a way of saying this is who God is.
Right.
There are today theologies of dominion. right, which run counter to the Jesus message.
Mm-hmm.
You don't dominate other people. I mean, he's explicit about that to his disciples. Right. That's what the Gentiles do. You asked about the ethics.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you... one way I like to think about Revelation is that it helps to read it something like Paul's letters, where we try to imagine what's the context that Paul's addressing. And so then how does he address his theological understanding of that context? Mm-hmm. I think Revelation has to be read in context. It is assessing the Roman Empire as thoroughly corrupt. It's idolatrous. It's violent. It's dishonest. It's exploitative. It's a monster, a beast. And Revelation has some ethical problems, like misogyny, or it's a prostitute, right? Mm-hmm. Willing to be violent, the prostitute in Revelation drinks blood in order to gain wealth. And you can read Revelation 17 and 18, and if you read it with an eye toward wealth, your reaction is going to be, wow. So if Rome, not just the empire that's out there, but the whole culture of the Roman Empire around the Mediterranean, if it's corrupt and exploitative and idolatrous, can a follower of the Lamb participate in that system? And the ethic of Revelation is you can't. You can read Revelation 2 and 3 and get that sense. Revelation 18:4 says, come out from her, the prostitute. Come out, my people. Language of don't soil your garments. This is an extremely rigorous kind of demand. Like, if you assess your whole society as deathly monstrous,
yeah,
then how do you survive? There have been Christian groups who've physically gotten up and moved and started their own communities, right? I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. There are 40,000 Amish and Mennonites right here. But in its own context, what Revelation may be asking people to do is give up all of the associations that provide social and economic security for themselves. And continue being, Revelation uses the language of faithful witnesses, continue speaking the way of Jesus at the risk of their lives. So the way I think about this is, it's not telling us what kind of ethic we should have in some specific way, but it is challenging us. How do we discern what kind of world we live in, and what parts of our world are monstrous or beastly, and what aspects of our world would require us to compromise our faithfulness to the way of Jesus? And to me, that's what sets Revelation apart within the New Testament, is how forcefully it presses those kinds of questions.
Yeah, if anything, it sounds to me like a helpful list of things to look out for or things to oppose, more than it's even telling you what to do, right?
Right.
Don't dominate people. Don't exploit people. Don't be dishonest. Obviously, some of the antitheses are simple, right? Like, clearly it's advocating for honesty, but the others, it's not quite so clear. Like, it's one thing to oppose imperial domination, but it's a harder question. What do you do instead? Like you said, do you move? Do you start your own society? Or how do you exist within a society? I think a lot of questions people ask today, like whether it's how do I buy clothes without supporting, child labor overseas, or how do I live a life that's not like destroying the environment, but I need to get to work? A lot of these, the answers seem to me a lot more complicated. It's easy to point out the areas of exploitation. It's harder to be like, okay, how do I actually, carry on? Other than, I know you pointed to being a faithful witness, but sometimes it's hard to know, what am I actually supposed to do?
discernment.
Yeah.
And, I don't think it was necessarily easier in Ephesus or Pergamum, these cities that are addressed by Revelation, where everything in the marketplace is being imported from somewhere else in the world, right? Enslaved people make up 20 to 50% of the population, depending on where you live. Your life is made possible by their exploitation. Symbolically, every city landscape, every civic organization, even the coins have the marks of Roman divinity and Roman power. So, we like to think of the ancient world as more simple than ours. I'm not sure that it, in a fundamental way, was.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I was just for a class here, I was looking at a coin from Ephesus. Very detailed, very intricate, incredibly well constructed. And it's got this little raised thing with emperor's face on it. And on the back, you get the goddess Artemis, the patron goddess of Ephesus. Which you're right, that's more explicitly idolatrous even than a modern piece of currency, right? So that's a good point. I think it is easy to be like to lean on the complexity of our world, but you're kind of saying in some way it's we have a lot more in common than I think is obvious.
I mean, I think what we want to do is, I agree. I think we want to read the whole Bible dialogically. Most of the biblical books were written they were all written in a context. And they often are responding to that context. And that invites us to take a look at our own. So there are certain kinds of things I couldn't do according to my understanding of Jesus, and certain kinds of things I do according to that. But that, as Will, that doesn't mean most of the Christians in this country would agree with me about what those are.
Yeah. So what do you think it looks like? What are some ways? I know the last subtitle is resistance.
Yeah.
As we think about, if we were to kind of focus just on today, what do you think, what is a revelation inspired way to resist, to live, to witness, right, in our world today, which may be more similar to the ancient world than we often think. But yeah, what are some ways, or what are some things we certainly ought to be resisting as we try, as we live in, you try to live a revelation inspired life?
Well, maybe, and I had not thought about it this way until you asked that question.
Okay. Well, I'm putting you on the spot.
Maybe we should take a hint from, once Revelation has introduced itself and the risen Jesus, it goes straight to those 7 assemblies. And maybe our first place to go would be to look at forms of Christian devotion that are dangerous, harmful. I would say right now we have an incredible amount of energy among forms of Christianity that are about, and it's their language, it's about dominion or being the head of society. There's a belief that God calls Christians to dominate all the spheres of society and especially government. That's not Revelation's view. At the end of Revelation, when all this has shaken out, the followers of Jesus govern society, but not in the world that we're living in. And I don't even aspire to it in this sort of context. We should look toward also aspects of our own society that are dishonest. Like we should be willing to name cautiously, carefully, because we don't want to be dishonest or manipulative, perversions of the truth, aspects of society that dehumanize or stigmatize other people, certainly aspects of society that depend on exploiting other people. Revelation is big on the language of every tribe and people and language and nation. So there's this sense that there are no like ethnic or national boundaries that divide, that you can assess people by. If you look at chapter 18, verses 12 and 13, there's what looks to most scholars like an explicit rejection of extreme wealth. When the prostitute Babylon, which is a way of talking about Rome in ancient Jewish literature, when the prostitute is destroyed, the merchants and rulers of the world are mourning. And there in verse 12, no one buys their cargo anymore. You get a list of the cargo, and it starts with precious metals and jewels. It is luxury items. And then military things. And then enslaved people is the last item in the list. So I don't think Christians should be narrowly partisan. I don't think we should pose as if we understand macroeconomics at some super sophisticated level. But as followers of the Lamb, we should be looking to live in a society in which if there's enough for everyone, everyone should have enough. Everyone should have a place. Folks should not be enslaved. We could understand that metaphorically. Those are the kinds of things I think look like resistance in Revelation. Revelation absolutely does not call the followers of the Lamb to take up weapons. So that's not what resistance means in Revelation or Daniel. And, the other hint we might take from the fact that the book sort of starts with these communities is, in my view, we need to look for expressions of our faith that are communal rather than simply individualistic. You can't survive the kind of division and violence we're experiencing right now. You cannot thrive in a context like ours without community.
Well, agreed. Thank you for that, Dr. Carey. I really appreciated the way that you're making Revelation, which can feel daunting, abstract, indiscernible, real, making it feel, more wedded with real life, giving us some actual things we can take from it out in our daily life. I think that's not easy to do. I think you make it sound easy because of your research into it. So I appreciate you sharing. I appreciate your reflections. It's been really great. We finally got a Revelation episode, and I'm really happy with how it went. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Will, for giving me the chance to share here.
Of course.